Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What. Today we've got Shoaib Ahmed on. He works in personal branding. How are we?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, really good. Really excited to have this chat. I'm sort of really getting into the personal branding world at the moment. I find it a really interesting industry.
Yeah, it's definitely blowing up a little bit on LinkedIn and even beyond LinkedIn, to be honest. I think as we get into kind of the influencer era, businesses and CEOs are jumping on the trend and, amplifying their own brand in that space.
Definitely. So, do you want to tell everyone a bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I essentially work in personal branding for one of the few um, personal branding agencies actually in the UK, but I can predict that we'll see a lot more of that in the future. My role itself is a personal brand manager. So I work across a number of clients managing their personal brands. What that mostly entails is actually creating content for them, um, really niche, getting down to the niche, basically understanding their voice in the market and who they want to be, and really emulating that across the content that we create. Um, so primarily that's LinkedIn content at the moment, but we're expanding on Twitter and basically any space where their audience is, we want to be there.
Mm.
So a
So,
lot of the, oh, sorry, go on.
do you work at Kurogo, right?
Kurogo, yeah.
With
I work at,
Sam? Is it Sam?
that's
Yeah.
it, yeah. You
Yeah,
had him
yeah,
on the
yeah.
podcast, didn't
We
you,
did,
last
yeah.
week?
Really, really interesting chat. And partly, one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on as well, is just because I love it. I think it's such an interesting industry, like you said, that's only going to grow. Because when you think about it, it's such a great way to get inbound business, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We have clients who don't need to do any kind of paid marketing in a sense to generate clients. It's all organic and it's also authentic and it really shows off the personality and the brand in the best possible light. And
Mm.
rather than relying on, third party space, it's actually the CEO and the execs of that company putting themselves out there so they have control over the narrative that they want to create about their brand, what they represent and what their values are.
So when people are thinking about going into the marketing world, let's say, because people will probably start off there. So, they're thinking of going into the marketing world. What is the difference between branding a company and branding a person?
To be honest, in my eyes, there's not much difference. I think
Mhm.
in the industry itself, at the moment, there is a difference, and that difference is marketing in general tends to be focused on brands and the business, and very business focused.
Mm.
Personal branding, I say, is 75% personal and 25% branding. So it's all about the individual, because at the end of the day, people follow people, and the more we humanize brands essentially, then the more likely they are to build a community, to build a following, to turn customers into fans, and
Yeah.
advocates of that person. I think we're seeing on TikTok, for example, at the moment, a lot of brands are tapping into that right now and putting the faces behind the brand first. And they're seeing great engagement because of it.
I think we're sort of almost just starting to tap into what a few businessmen have always probably known. If you look at characters like Richard Branson,
Mhm.
maybe Steve Jobs, even to the extent of Bill Gates, people didn't necessarily, okay, they built good products, without a doubt. But people really bought into, I'm buying, oh, I'm going to go with Virgin because, I know Richard Branson, he has these values, or Steve Jobs has just done this big, presentation for this Apple. Oh my God, he's all about future tech and this is fantastic. So they've maybe known this for a while, but we're all it's starting to filter down into every sort of business plan now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of up and coming startups as well. Even startups that haven't launched their product yet, their CEOs are now building their personal brand ready for that. It's definitely something that I think will explode over the next few years. And rightly so, I think, because for me personally, if I was to invest in a brand, I'd want to know the people behind it, their values. And I think
Mm.
especially the younger generation, Gen Z, is increasingly kind of aware and conscious of the values behind a brand. And the more you can portray that in an authentic manner, then the better your revenues is essentially going to be.
Definitely. So how did you end up in this world of personal branding then?
Yeah, so well, I did a geography degree at university, which is very different from personal branding. And then on my year in industry, I did a marketing placement for a marketing and media agency in London.
Hmm.
And whilst I was there, that was very much kind of a whistle-stop tour of marketing, email marketing, social media management, events, a bit of creative, a bit of digital, a bit of blog writing and SEO. So a real kind of crash course into the world of marketing. And then actually after university, I had a number of kind of job opportunities and a grad scheme lined up.
Mm.
I whilst I was actually at uni, I Sam, who you've mentioned, CEO of Kurogo, he reached
Mm.
out to me and was looking for a content writer. And based on my kind of content on LinkedIn previously, he asked me, do you want to come on board? It wasn't really a formal interview or anything. He just asked, do you want the job? And I said, yes, great. A bit of money on the side whilst I'm at uni in my final year.
Mm.
And then after uni, I had those job opportunities lined up, and ultimately I declined them and took a bit of a risk and threw myself into working for a startup in the personal branding space.
I
Which
love
was,
that.
yeah.
We always talk about that. People that listen regularly will know that I kind of bang on and bore everyone about the importance of actually building your own personal brand. I probably don't word it in that way, but not relying on a CV as much these days, as showing content, showcasing it on social media, any work you've done, because that is exactly what's happened to you. You've showcased maybe, your work on LinkedIn, or, you've been present there, and Sam's just reached out to you. A startup founder has reached out to you. So, I don't know what your take is on CVs, but mine is they're a bit old fashioned. And for the way the world's going and all these new startups that are forming, they actually want to see a bit of your work you've done, and actually you have the skills that they want.
Oh, 100%. I think, there's some industries where, you're naturally going to want technical qualifications because it means you have these specific competencies. I'm talking like the medical profession or
Sure.
computer science. I think a lot of the industries, though, a CV is a bit outdated. For me
Mm.
personally, I see LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile, and my content as almost like a digital CV. That's a much better way of getting to know me, getting to know who I am, my values, what I believe in, what I can do. Um, yeah, I 100% agree. I think CVs are becoming outdated, and the personal brand, it's something that it stays with you, and doors are constantly opening. Even now, in the position that I'm in at Kroger, like other opportunities have come my way. Whether it's podcasts such as this one, but also just networking and tapping into different networks and communities of people who will help me and serve me in the long term as well.
Yeah.
CV is, it's kind of it gets you through the door to an interview, and that's it. A personal brand, branches out into loads of different areas, things that you can't even possibly think or know of at this moment, but it's
Mm.
kind of a constant progression upwards.
I have to say, doing this podcast, we've had, so many different founders on and people working in different careers. And that's almost, in my mind, these people have been building their personal brands because, in my separate business endeavors, when I want someone that's got a skill set, the first person I go to is, oh yeah, they came on the podcast. They've got a really good personal brand. They've done X, Y, and Z. It's almost like it's the future of networking, isn't it?
100%. I think also with the pandemic, in a sense, we haven't been able to go in person and meet people, or
Mm.
students or graduates going to offices to have interviews and assessment centres and that kind of thing. And people are more reliant on someone's digital brand and digital persona. I think also a lot of people had a bit more time
Yeah.
working from home and or being on furlough or whatever, to actually invest in personal branding. And we're seeing now, the era of the great resignation, as people are calling it.
Mm.
Loads of people are leaving their work and pursuing something that they really believe in or want a lifestyle change because they've actually realized what they hold as valuable is not what they're currently doing. And the personal branding just fits into that perfectly because it's allowing people control over their reputation and how they're seen. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, everyone makes judgment on other people, right? And whether you're applying for a job or applying for investment for your startup, a judgment is going to be made about you and your competencies and your values. Personal branding is just a way for you to control that, for you to, mold that into what you want to be seen as.
Yeah, I think a really interesting point came up as well on a previous podcast when I was talking to a CEO. And he was saying all these people now with these personal brands on LinkedIn, it's actually making business owners and leaders' jobs actually easier to build teams, because previously what would happen is you'd have someone in, they'd show you a CV, and we all know we'd probably pump our CVs up a little bit, maybe put a few things in extra. But with now having a personal brand, you can build a team that actually has skills you need, opposed to just, it's the old analogy of putting, a square in a round hole. You can actually build the team you need based on the skills that they showcase. And ultimately, your employees are going to be happy as well because they're doing what they're skilled at, right?
100%. Personal branding is not just about finding that individual job opportunities. For employers, it's a really good way to attract new talent, retain existing talent, and raise investment. There's so many different benefits that come with personal branding. So yeah, 100% agree with you on that one.
So a little question for any of the students or people at uni or whoever's listening to this. I think, I actually would like to start building my personal brand. Is there any sort of, maybe a couple of tips that you've got for starting to build your personal brand?
Mm-hmm. Firstly, I think I would just say you've just got to do it. You've got to take the first step, whether that's, whether you're not even on LinkedIn and you're setting up a LinkedIn profile, whether you're already on LinkedIn but you haven't posted content yet, your first step would be to put your first post out there or send somebody that direct message. Once you do that first step, everything else becomes a lot easier. In terms of more actionable steps, I've been on LinkedIn for maybe four years now, and in the last 2 months, I've had the most engagement and the most following and the most opportunities just condensed within that 2 months. And that's when I also start creating content seriously.
Yeah.
So there's a direct correlation there, with outcome and results based on the input. I also like when people ask me this question, I always say to them, you've got to think kind of strategy wise, as if you were marketing a product or marketing a service. You have to follow the same principles with your own personal brand. So I always start with, my mission. What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? For me, that's building a community of marketers, of young people, ambitious people who just want to share value with each other. And then I think the next thing is considering your values. Like, who do you want to be seen as and what do you want to be known for? You've got to kind of narrow that down. So for me, I want to be seen as somebody who's like honest and authentic in my approach, approachable. These kind of buzzwords, but they actually do mean something, because every time you go to create content or jump on a podcast or whatever you do, you're constantly thinking about how you want to be seen and kind of massaging your personal brand in, a favorable way. Yeah. And then of course you have the final kind of thing that I'd say is your content pillars. You have to know exactly is what you want to talk about. There's some people who, want to talk about everything, and then it's very easy for their audience or the people who follow them to not actually understand what that person does or what they do best.
Yeah,
I would say pick 3 or 4 things that you're passionate about, that you can speak upon, and that you have experience in. For me personally, that's personal branding, growth marketing, diversity and inclusion, and employability. So every piece of content I create, every conversation I have is kind of tailored around those things.
Sure.
And what's that done has helped me to build 4 different communities in each of those areas. So it's about kind of knowing your audience, knowing who you are, and then creating good content that hits both of those.
No, great points. For people listening that are thinking of going into personal branding, we spoke about it earlier, we think it's going to be a growing industry. What's an average day like?
Oh, an average day. Well, I think working at startup in itself is quite chaotic. But working in personal branding and a startup, for me, I usually wake up and first thing I do when I open my laptop is just browse on LinkedIn, browse on particular websites, things like Marketing Week, Ad Age, famouscampaigns.com, basically the kind of leading industry publications, just to get a sense of what's happening in the industry, key trends that are going on, that kind of thing. Because to create good content, you have to consume it at the same time. And you have to be aware of what's going on in the industry and the industry of your clients. So for me, I work with a lot of marketing agencies, CEOs of e-commerce agencies, and things around websites and design and that kind of thing. So for me, I have to fully be immersed in that world. So originally, kind of, I tend to do a bit of research around that. Actually, every morning I focus on my own personal brand as well. So I'm
Hmm.
constantly engaging with other people, networking, replying to DMs. And then each day tends to follow a similar routine for me. It's work because I have a set number of clients that I work across. So it's about each week nailing down what that client wants to speak about, what kind of topic clusters they want to comment on, then actually drafting posts up, doing some research in that industry, whether that's reading blogs, podcasts, or whatever, and then actually creating the content in itself, which is the most time consuming thing, especially if you want to really hit their voice and
Mm.
make it sound appropriate. So if somebody else was to read that, if their friend was to read that, they wouldn't think twice whether that person said it or whether they've paid someone to say it
That
for
must be
them.
a really difficult skill to build.
100%. I mean, it just comes back to knowing that your client and putting in that time to really understand them. I think Sam actually gave me a really good tip. Um, was to actually follow that person. So with a lot of my clients, we're in WhatsApp groups, and I follow their personal social media channels. So I'm
Yeah.
fully able to kind of understand, even down to the language that they use. You know, let's say, for example, some people would say mate, some people would say bud, some people may say pal. Like
Yeah.
little things like that, or even how they might reply to a comment, but some people would say cheers, some people would say thanks, some people would say thank you. It comes
Yeah.
down to, the really kind of microscopic details of what that person wants to say to ensure they sound really authentic. And of course, you've got to speak to your clients regularly. So I have check-ins, I send voice notes to clients, making sure that the things they want to see, the things they want to see on their LinkedIn feeds, but also the things they want to talk about, or the angles or points of view that they want to come in with. I need to make sure, it's my job to make sure that they're all addressed. So it's just communication.
It sounds
It's
like a
solid
really
communication.
interesting job. You're always doing something different, always working on somebody different, a different profile, a different character. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's good fun. It's also actually a great learning experience for me
I bet.
personally, because I'm a graduate who left uni about 7, 8 months ago now. Um, I'm still very much in kind of the early days of my career, but then when I'm writing content for one of the leading video marketing agencies in the world, whose clients, are global brands, and I have to be the voice of their founder, I have to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like forces me very quickly to understand an industry, and because I work with so many clients in different industries, I'm picking up loads of kind of insights and knowledge in areas like SEO or paid ads or video marketing, production, e-commerce, web development. So it's absolutely a great opportunity for me personally to just learn so much.
Yeah. And what kind of personality traits do you think you see in yourself that really help you to succeed? I'm going to guess that, being organized is really key here as well.
Yeah, 100%. Because when you have a contract with a client and they want 5, 6, whatever posts going out per week, you need to make sure you deliver that. And also with personal branding, just generally, consistency is really important. So you have to work 1, 2, 3 weeks ahead of schedule at all times, to make sure that you've got that consistent stream of content going out. Organization, definitely a major one. I think also attention to detail. It's very easy when you're working across 15 different clients to take the easy route, or maybe slack a little with one client because you don't find their content interesting. But you've got to make sure, it comes down to every word you use
Yeah.
essentially, and every comment you engage with, every reply you give. It's all about making sure that you don't take your foot off the gas with any of the clients at any time.
Mm. And for you, what's been the biggest positive working in this industry so far?
Oh, I mean, there's been loads. I mean, building a community on LinkedIn has to be up there. I
Mm.
get 10 to 15 like DMs a day
Wow.
just with most of them are people kind of who haven't really been or used LinkedIn before, and they kind of come to me and they're saying, look, I'm about to do my first post, would you read it over for me? Or I want to network with this person, but I'm not sure the best way to approach it. And it's insane that after 6 months of working in the industry, people like see me almost as somebody to go to for
Yeah.
advice and support, which is really flattering, but also a huge responsibility at the same time. Um, Otherwise, loads of like job opportunities come my way, freelance work opportunities. As I said, personal branding at the moment isn't a huge space in terms of the market isn't saturated at all. There's only a cluster of agencies in this space. So a lot of companies actually are crying out for people. Personal brand experts or freelancers. So there's a lot of jobs out there as well, and being offered, really good opportunities is always a bonus.
Yeah, you're in a great place at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
And on the flip side of that, what's something that's probably a little bit less favorable of working in the industry?
I think that's a tricky one, to be honest. There's nothing that stands out to me as a negative.
That's
Um,
okay. That could be
I,
the answer.
yeah, I think if there's one thing potentially that I'd say is if you're working in the personal branding industry, then you've got to really nail your own personal brand, because you can't essentially provide a service for clients if you're not demonstrating that you have those skills. So for me, it's a lot of responsibility and sometimes a bit of pressure for me to make sure that my personal brand is as best as it can be. And again, that requires a lot of time. So outside of work, I'm doing work but focus on my personal brand. What do I want to speak about? What content am I going to bring to the table? But again, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah. And from you, anybody listening to this and thinking I'd love to get into it, 2 pieces of advice as to how they can stand out and acquire the skills they'll need to get into it.
Yeah, first of all, I'd say if you have, well, whatever you're passionate about, you need to show that, you need to demonstrate that. So if you're, wanting to go into SEO or blog writing, for example, set up a blog on a WordPress site, or set up a website or something where you're able to create content and demonstrate your passion. If you're going into, another industry, say graphic design, start building your portfolio now. It's all these kind of little side projects. For me, that's how I got into personal branding. 2 years ago, I created a guide to LinkedIn, a minute ebook, helping people build and optimize their LinkedIn profiles. And that's
Cool.
actually what Sam saw. And based on that alone, he offered me the job because he saw that I was able to demonstrate that I knew what I was talking about. So yeah, action, I think, speak a lot louder than words. So that would be my first piece of advice. And secondly, network. Constant, even on LinkedIn, there's people who don't post that often, maybe once or twice a month, and they have a huge personal brand because they're leaving really valuable and insightful comments on other people's content.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just about knowing the people in your industry and providing value. If you can do those 2 things, then without a doubt, you're going to build a solid personal brand.
And I think I already know the answer to this one, but would you still go into the industry knowing everything you know now?
100%. If anything, I would have started, taking my personal brand a lot more seriously when I was younger. Because the doors that it's opened for me are just insane. So if I knew this, going into university, for example, and having those 3 years at university and all those experiences that you can, translate into content. I mean, for any university students out there listening to this, like, start your personal brand now. It's something you will 100% not regret.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I found it really interesting, and thank you for taking the time out.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And where can people find you and what you're up to?
Yeah, so people can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active, Shoaib Ahmed. A lot of the kind of other projects or things that are happening very soon, I'll be announcing on there. So that's the best place to check me out.
Thanks, Shoaib.
Thanks.